Welcome back. This is our third week of the workshop series on trauma healing and Ayurveda. It's so wonderful and sacred and special to be joining here with you around this topic. And today, as each session, I really emphasize spiritual practice and our connection to the divine to be the foundation for healing any kind of trauma. And then I like to share, so we do that at the beginning and the end of this session. And then I like to share some education and teachings and practical application of those teachings for you. So we'll be doing that, a brief kind of cumulative overview of the things we've been covering each week. And then I will bridge that into some practices that you can do in your day-to-day life. And then we'll have plenty of time for Q&A. So if you want any support or insights on your unique healing situation, whether that has become just general overall hypersensitivity in your nervous system, feeling, that tenderness that the empath feels in the world, or if you also have sometimes when there's trauma inflicted, especially childhood trauma, it manifests in physical ailment, physical pain, chronic illness, various things that usually people will hit dead ends when they try to see their Western doctors or even holistic practitioners. They'll have a hard time really getting to the root cause of why their physiology keeps being off and creating this pain cycle for them. So when we trace it back to the energetic root, trauma and the distortion in the mental emotional field is what creates the perpetuation of physical pain or illness. So if there's something that you're struggling with in that arena, I can also speak to that more individually and specifically with you, you one-to-one in the group, and then everyone gets to learn from each other's examples, and we get to build our strength and trust and depth of community here in this context. So so let's start just by diving into practices so that you have a moment to just center inside of yourself. And we've been using this one mantra, Hari Om, which is just a beautiful universal prayer that helps connect us to our unique connection with divinity in our heart and in our body. And Hari Om is also taught in yoga philosophy lineage as a mantra. The three syllables of Ha and then Ri and then Om creates a movement of prana, a flow of energy in the body, a circuit of energy that helps keep everything dilated and moving. And it essentially, the Ha starts down here in your belly, Ri moves up the spine, and then Om circulates it out and around, and then it continues that way. And so the sound Om itself is actually three different sounds and three different parts all strung together. And it is a primordial seed sound known as a bija mantra. Bija means seed. And this seed sound is the seed sound of creation. So it's the hum of the universe. It's the essential vibration that all molecules that are vibrating in existence resonate with. And so just the sound Om helps us tune into that frequency of life and of aliveness and of just connection to something much greater beyond the limitations of our mind and body. And the three sounds of Om are actually A, U, M. So Ah, U, and And those three sounds are also connected to the three cycles of life: birth, life, and death. Birth, life, and death. So the element of creation and of preservation of life, and then of the recycling and re or, recycling of life back into the earth to be born again. So the A, U, is also connected to the concept of alpha and omega. There's really no beginning or ending. It's just the totality of all existence. So these vibrations and these sounds, this bija mantra, along with Hari Om, helps us connect to this eternal sound. It helps us move the energy in our body and connect to our center. And it helps us in that way also regulate our nervous system, feel connected to our hearts, feel connected to a sense of peace, and to our true essential nature. And so, one of the reasons why this is so important in healing trauma is because the nervous system is usually dysregulated to some set point that creates a hypersensitivity or a reactivity to stimulus that doesn't necessarily warrant that response. Meaning, if a normal stress response, if you are actually getting chased down by an animal that's a predator, a normal stress response would be your heart's going to race, your muscles are going to fire, all the blood moves away from digestion because that's a non-essential function at the moment. It's going to go into your limbs, into your muscles so that you can get away. But what happens is that we have, when there's a trauma, especially at a young age, then we start to have this same nervous system response to stimulus that actually isn't life threatening, but we perceive it to be. So it's something very subtle, like our caretaker talking down at us, reprimanding us, or just being in their own bad mood and taking it out on us. And we start to learn my safety is compromised, and because my inherent survival is dependent on this person, the body reacts in a similar way to, in the same way as if it were actually being chased by a predator. So because it's tied up with that survival instinct. And so what happens then over time with the nervous system being dysregulated is that the um, that sense of being hyper triggered creates the same neurochemical effect, and the blood moves away from the digestion. So chronically over time, the digestion can't digest, the gut can't digest food because there's no energy there, there's no blood there. The muscles get tight and stiff and stressed, and tension builds because that energy is consistently shunted away from the gut into the rest of the body. Reproduction doesn't happen. Pain happens in this area of the body too. So there's so much more that happens there, but I just wanted to give you one little piece of framework to understand. When we chant, there's something very real physiologically, a benefit that happens from that, while simultaneously connecting us with our higher truth, a connection with our creator and with divine love. And it has a very real physiological effect, because the most important thing is to regulate the nervous system to feel a sense of safety, because when you feel safe in your nervous system, you naturally start to feel connected to this beautiful omnipresent power beyond yourself. And when you're in a fight or flight or a cortisol, adrenaline kind of response unconsciously, it's nearly impossible to connect with that. You can use your voice and cry out to the divine to connect, and that will actually help. That's, we can do another module on that, actually, the power of prayer and using very specific kinds of prayers. And when I say specific prayers, I don't mean from a particular religion or lineage, but more just the way that you frame your prayer from your heart to the divine, that helps like reset you and come back into a sense of safety. But yeah, so when we're chanting, just think of, you can think of some of these benefits, and you can also just remember that not only is the physiology being benefit, but as the physiology relaxes and tension unravels, we start to connect effortlessly with that greater aspect of ourselves, that part of us that's always guiding us, the part of us that's connected to our intuition, that knows the way. It kind of transcends even the mind and the mental faculties, the voices in us that try to control and figure it out and use logic and reason and willpower to push through. Those voices can become quieter and take a back seat. And so your voice of clarity can come through. And the voice of truth, the voice of your heart, the voice of your intuition, the voice of God guiding you is always quiet. It's pretty slow and still. It doesn't use a lot of words. The voices that whenever we get confused around our discernment, like, wait, is this the voice of my higher guidance or is this the voice of my higher guidance? You always know that the chattery voices that are really loud and taking up your mental space are not the voices of the divine guiding you. They're the ones that are trying to get your attention because they have some agenda. They have something to prove. They're trying to control you. They're trying to get their selfish needs met. And whatever that is, usually unknown to you. And that voice of that quiet whisper of your true guidance comes when you peel back the layers and come quietly into yourself and into your heart. Okay, we had a couple new friends join us. Whoops, I just got to mute your lines. Okay. So with all that said, now we understand the importance and the benefit of this chanting. So let's do the practice. So I'm going to write the words in the chat box. So it's very simple. Ha, ri, om. And the ri is kind of like a flick of the tongue on the roof of your mouth. Like it sometimes sounds like hari, like a D, but it's kind of like a Spanish rolling of the tongue, hari. And it's also fine to say hari, whatever your mouth and tongue is still fine. But in Sanskrit, it's hari om. So let's just try saying that together. Ha, ri, om. And then remember that energy. You don't have to focus on it. It'll happen whether or not you focus on it, but it kind of helps to just tune into your body. So ha comes from down here, and the hara. Hara is the center of your power and your connection to your own empowerment and your sense of deep intuition and wisdom and knowing. So ha, ri, om, ha, ri, om. Couple more times. Ha, ri, om. Really good. Ha, ri, om. Ha, ri, om. Couple more times extended like that. Hari Om. Hari Om. And can you feel yourself starting to quiet in the mind, even just with that beginning practice? Now we'll sing it along in a little melody. Hari Om, 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 Hari Om. Hari Om, 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 Hari Hari Om, 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 Hare. Hari Om, 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 Hare. Keep writing that mantra into your heart as it gets quieter and quieter until it becomes just a repetition inside of your quiet mind. Hari Om, 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 Hare. Allow this mantra to be the backdrop of your awareness as you continue to repeat Hari Om, Hari Om. Mantra is a term that actually means M-A-N, is manas, which is the Sanskrit word for mind. Tra, T-R-A, is a tool. So a mantra is actually a tool for the mind to keep the mind focused, on sat, on what's true. Satya is truth. To keep the mind focused on God, on the divine, on the eternal nature beyond our limited physical forms. And a tool to guide the mind to be your servant, not your leader. So there's a saying, there's a concept in Ayurveda and in the ancient Vedas and in yoga philosophy that we are not the mind, but we have a mind. So you have a mind, but you are not the mind. The mind, because you are able to perceive your thoughts, because you are able to witness through your consciousness these flickering streams of thoughts and reactions to the external world. Who is the perceiver? Who is the knower? Who is the seer of that? You have a mind, but you are not the mind. Those thoughts that you think are not you. Those voices that you hear that are fearful, angry, worried, self-deprecating, apathetic, ashamed, hurt, those voices are not you. But if those voices have been repressed, suppressed, not given an outlet to express, they need to be fed. Not fed in the way that you're going to give them power, but they will feed on you until you feed them. Feed them with the highest tool of mantra, of immersion in your divine connection, so that they have food that will support them, meaning they are your servant, meaning you feed them with good food so that they can serve you. Otherwise, most people will live their whole lives becoming the slave to their thoughts and to their mind. So when it comes to healing trauma, we have a distortion in some of those traumatic imprints that aren't just thoughts, because what I'm saying to you right now is cognitive. I'm using my speech to help deliver a message to you. But there's, you can hear consciously, cognitively, I am not the mind. Okay, I understand. I'm not my traumas. I'm not my past. But how do we deliver that message into the deepest part of our knowing, into the deepest part of ourselves, and into the parts of ourselves that have forgotten? And that's what we're really doing here. That's what healing trauma actually is. It's really not about going in, just doing shadow work and going into the wounding, because a lot of times, if done improperly, that can create a healing crisis, excuse me, and perpetuate just trigger after trigger after trigger after trigger. But trauma healing through an Ayurvedic lens and through a spiritual lens also doesn't look like making everything light and love and just positivity and all that, right? That's just spiritual bypassing. But rather, a really integrated way, trauma healing through the Ayurvedic lens, is how can we remember our parts of our, like as if parts of our body have been dismembered from us. How can we remember those parts when there's trauma, especially in childhood during the subconscious development of the mind, the first 7 years of life? The subconscious mind is being developed in that developmental stage. So when there's trauma, especially during that time, there's a fragmentation. There's a part of us that is detached from us that needs to be literally remembered back into the wholeness. And that part, when it is violated, when it is interrupted from that healthy, safe consistency in any way, there's a little part of our energy body and of our antakarana, which are different aspects of our inner workings of our mind, that's been fragmented. So part of our psyche gets fragmented. And that little part of us is the part that forgets, because it was violated, it was hurt, its innocence was taken. Whatever the case may be, it was fragmented. And so the work is to clear up the field of distortion that exists around that kind of entity, that part of you, and bring it back into the whole that is your true self. But we can't just jump right to the true self. We have to, because that becomes a bypass. So the whole practice here is about creating actual safety in our physical body, in our nervous system, through our daily consistent habits, and through the practices that allow prana, the energy of our life, to move fluidly through our body. And through the practice of cultivating safety, it ripens, and fortifying our spiritual connection, it ripens those fragmented parts of self and those traumatic imprints. It brings them to the surface so they can actually be reprocessed and released, so that you can return back to the whole. Some trauma healing methods are very prodding and work more at the psychological level to reprocess. And I've found that like cognitive behavioral therapy type of work alone doesn't get to the deepest subconscious parts and not into the body, the somatic experience. Because for my story, most of my traumas and abuse, particularly sexual trauma and molestation, happened before the age of 5, and then probably beyond that. But I don't have much visual memory because I was so young. But my physical body remembered. So there's no amount of talking about the PTSD and the dissociative disorder and the triggers that I had in my environment as to why I would constantly go into panic attack, or why I would constantly be triggered with terror in my whole body. Like, yeah, I could talk about, well, this thing triggered me, that thing triggered me. But unless I'm able to actually rewire the neurology on the deepest level and not be triggered by those things anymore, and deeply connect to a sense of peace and safety in my body, then what's the use? We need methodologies that allow us to go deepest into the soma, into the body. But then there's a lot of the therapies too that are just somatic experiencing, for example. And somatic experiencing is a wonderful, it's a wonderful tool. It's helped me a lot, but and it and I use it within my clients, with my clients and students, but it needs to be fit under the umbrella of spiritual practice, because if we're just to reprocess the somatic experience again, it goes through the same neural pathways, and samskaras are reinforced. And samskara in Ayurveda and yoga philosophy, if you're not familiar with that term, is a groove. It's essentially, you can imagine it as like a stone that has like a groove in it, and when you pour water on it, it always follows that same groove. And then you take that metaphor and look at our physiology. So if there's a particular impulse that happens, the groove is actually a specific cascade of neurochemicals that flood your body in a certain way, make you feel a certain way. And then usually they're combined with certain thought patterns that also follow the same downward spiral. So those are samskaras, those instantaneous, knee-jerk kind of reactions that we have to things around us. And most healing methodologies, even around trauma, don't address samskaras in the deepest level. So I want to empower you with some of this knowledge too, is that the way that you need to repattern samskara is first through consistent, regular spiritual practice, ideally done first thing in the morning, right when you wake up, because all of nature exists within us. And we are inherently a microcosm to the macrocosm. So when you look at the lifespan of your whole life, from birth through all of life, back to the earth and composted, coming back to birth, if that's one macrocosm, then the microcosm is every single day. First thing in the morning, the sun rises, and that is the same as your early childhood on a microcosmic scale. And then you go throughout the day, and then you wind down for bed, and then you sleep. And so that little microcosm of the greater macrocosm is a daily opportunity to repattern childhood trauma or any samskara in your life too, by rebirthing the body every single morning when you wake up and aligning it with a higher reality, a higher truth, with peace, with serenity, with divine unconditional love, with trust, with faith, with calm, relaxation, with so on and so on. So that first opportunity, first thing early in the morning, is the first part of the foundation of rewiring these samskaras. But secondly, how to rewire samskaras in the deepest way is I used the analogy of the stone and the groove in that rock, right? And the water pours through it, and it always follows the same pattern. So, of course, there's one way you could go about it, which is to take a hammer and a chisel and try to make a groove going in a different direction, right? And so those methodologies are using willpower and like your inner fire to repattern your behaviors, and to use things like even NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, to like, well, I'm just going to think a different thought, and I'm going to choose, how I feel, and I'm going to not react, and I'm going to do this thing every day for 30 days, 90 days, whatever the case is. And I'm going to have accountability and I'm going to do the thing. And so that's essentially using it. It'll still make a new groove, but the problem is it starts getting really hard at some point. And it may not work as thoroughly as you want it, because it doesn't get to that deepest soft layers, but it'll still create a new habit. It'll still create a new behavior. It'll still create a new groove, but you have to use a tremendous amount of life energy and willpower to do it, right? A lot of muscle. So another way that you could do it is, what if you could just soften that whole stone like back into like a clay-like state, right? Water it and be like, oh, it's actually, your nervous system actually isn't stone. So it's actually malleable. And so turn that add water, soften the whole matrix of that nervous system, of that stone, so to speak, back into clay, a malleable clay, and then recreate the new groove. And the methodology for doing that in that way is essentially this approach that I'm sharing with you through how I've integrated trauma healing and Ayurveda through the Enlightened Body System, which is the program that I created around it. And so the way that you do the softening is through daily pranayama practice, so daily energy type practices. Last week, I walked you through a humming breath that helps soften that. There's a series of other pranayama practices that are really helpful to do that. But one of the things that regular daily, and this is also helpful first thing in the morning, you do some kind of prayer, connection to the divine, straight into your breathwork practices, and they help soften and rewire this matrix, so to speak. And those practices are let me put it into a metaphor. So if you imagine going through a garden hose, you want that water to, right? If the hose gets kinked, it stops the flow of the water, right? So in the Ayurvedic system, you have 72,000 nadis, which are kind of like in Chinese medicine, the meridian channels. They're very, very closely related. Almost, my teacher co-wrote a textbook that shows all of the overlaps between the Chinese medicine meridians and the Ayurvedic nadi system. But so there's 72,000 subtle energy channels flowing through your body. They're more subtle than the nerves. They can't be dissected and seen in an autopsy, but they're there, and they're subtle energy channels that move, that keep energy flowing in your body. And so when there's a trauma of any kind, certain emotional traumas might have an affinity to a certain organ, or say, for example, of like sexual trauma, it closes down the pranic channels, the nadis of the reproductive system, which then also affects other channels. But basically, somewhere in those body, the channels are constricted, just like that garden hose gets kinked. And so daily pranayama, before I even get to pranayama, so when those become kinked, take it one step further in your visualization. What happens when your blood vessels get kinked? Like you sit on your leg wrong for too long, and what happens? You start to get tingly, you start to lose blood flow to an area, right? And it's like, if you actually stayed there for too long, or that area was completely cut off of blood supply for too long, the tissue would actually start to die. That's why it kind of hurts when the tingling comes back in. It's because the blood's rushing back to that place, and the tissue's like, like I've been being choked. And so it feels funny, but that's because it's very mild. You take that all the way to like a myocardial infarction, where there's a heart attack, where one of those blood vessels becomes blocked and the oxygen can't get to the tissue, And that little part of the heart tissue actually becomes infarcted, it dies. And so in the body, it becomes nearly impossible to repattern trauma when all of the pranic energy pathways are compromised, or even if they're just a little constricted and the energy is not flowing through them. I gave you the example earlier of the fight or flight response and the blood shunting away from the gut into the muscles. Well, this is one of the energetic causes. The pranic channels are no longer bringing energy to the gut. Let's just breathe, just thinking about that, right? And even if there's not trauma, by virtue of living in this society where we're told to look a certain way and suck your gut in, and you actually don't allow the energy to come down here. So it's like we have to learn how to breathe properly. We have to, most of us, or half of the population, is a reverse breather, meaning when they take a deep breath in, so go ahead and take a deep breath in real quick. Where does the energy go? Where does the breath go? Do you feel your chest puff up, or do you feel your belly puff out? Just be honest, just notice where that is. At least half the population, most of us, when we breathe in, we suck our belly in and puff our chest up, right? Thank you for your honesty, typing in chest. So like we have this thing in our culture where it's like, look skinnier, even though all of the models are airbrushed and painted and fake. Like we have this completely unrealistic perception of what our bodies should look like. And so we breathe in deep, but we suck it up to our chest and we suck in down here. And what does that do? That shunts all the prana away from the belly, where your vagus nerve innervates down here. Your vagus nerve is responsible for your overall nervous system feeling of calm, peace, and safety. So safety, I can't emphasize it enough, the importance of dilating, making bigger, widening these energy channels in your body so that they can actually move this life force energy of prana into all the areas that it needs to go, and that it can create a feeling of safety and connection in your physical body. So especially if you were someone who just puffed up your chest when you breathed in, I just want to quickly show you how you can bring the energy back down. So basically just put your hands over your belly for a moment, or actually you can put one hand over your belly and one hand on your chest. And take a few breaths. You don't have to force it to be really big breaths or anything like that, but just try to press into your chest a little bit and just try to keep your chest still. And then when you inhale, feel your belly kind of push into your hand and just start to relax. Just like give yourself permission to have a nice, big, jolly Buddha belly right now. And just start to feel that relax. And then as you exhale, the navel moves towards the spine. And as you inhale, moves away from the spine and relaxes, and the hand moves away from the spine. And take a few more breaths, just again, chest staying still and only the belly's moving. And the belly stretches. And now you want to feel the belly on the inhale stretch to the front, into the navel, but also from side to side. Good. And then contract it all back into the center. And then inhale and feel it expand front, side to side, and even into your back. So imagine you can expand out front, back, side, side in all directions. And then exhale and pull it all back to the center. And inhale, belly expands in all directions. And exhale, and it all comes back to the center. Good. And all the while, the chest is staying still. Good. And now you're going to release the chest. And as you inhale, fill the bottom, but then let it to start to come up to the chest, kind of like you're filling a pitcher of water from bottom to top. But just the bottom fills first, and then it comes up to the rib cage and then up to the chest. And then as you exhale, chest, rib cage, belly. Inhale, belly, rib cage, chest. Exhale, chest, rib cage, belly. Inhale, belly, rib cage, chest. Exhale, chest, rib cage, belly. And continue doing that as long as feels right for you. If at any time you feel a little lightheaded because you're not used to breathing this deep, just come back to your regular breath. And over time, practicing this, it will get easier and easier as your body gets acclimated to feeling that calmness and to getting that much oxygen. So even the lower third of your lungs is where a majority of the oxygen exchange takes place. So your whole body is receiving nutrients by you breathing this way. And if it's hard because you found yourself to be a reverse breather meaning when you inhale, your chest puffed up, you can also do this exercise I just gave you, laying on the ground on your back with your knees bent, feet on the floor. And that just makes it a little bit easier because your back is relaxed. And then you can just focus on pushing your belly button up to the ceiling and then back down to the floor. And with students in the past, I've called it the washcloth method. So they just fold up a little washcloth and put it on their belly button. And then they lay on the floor and they work on pushing it up and down. And that starts to free up the energy in the diaphragm. And it starts to activate your vagus nerve, meaning the part of you that's associated with your sympathetic nervous system that brings waves of calm and peace. So this is a really important exercise. So back to this idea of softening that samskara back into clay so that it can be repatterned. Early morning, first thing in the morning, praying straight out of bed, connecting with the divine in some way, straight out of bed, even before you get out of bed if you like. I like to roll out of bed and straight into devotion. First thing that I do, light a candle and just like connect. And then do some breath work practices, such as the one I just taught you today and in other sessions. And creating this consistency is part of establishing safety and, for one, having enough space between you and your thoughts. You want to establish first thing in the morning having a witness mentality, meaning you watch your thoughts as if you're watching a movie screen. The thoughts are being projected onto the movie screen and you're just watching it. Sometimes when you're really immersed in a movie that you're watching, there's a moment where you forget. You're like, whoa, the movie ends and you're like, whoa, I'm still here. You were so like wrapped up in the main character's life that like you thought you were in it. But really you were in the seat watching that on the projector screen. As soon as the movie turns off, you realize it's just a screen. That screen isn't my life. That screen was, that movie was light projected onto a screen. It wasn't even real, really, right? And so the same with our life, our thoughts, our movements of our mind. You want to create space between the true you and the projections that your thoughts puts onto the movie screen of your mind, and not somehow let that be switched, or let the thoughts control you, or believe the meanderings of the mind and believe the thoughts. Your mind is not bad or evil. Your mind can be a great ally for you, a great ally. You can feed the higher faculties of your mind through creative endeavors, through filling. You really actually want to look at the food that you feed the mind. Because as we talked about in previous sessions, there's 3 different tendencies of the mind, 3 different energies: sattva, rajas, and tamas. So sattva is the energy of purity, harmony, and is associated with your higher truth. Oops, I typed that in there for you, but it went just as a direct message. Let me make sure that it goes to everybody, for those of you who weren't on the previous sessions. Oh, I have my other keyboard right here. Rajas is agitation, excitation, and movement. And tamas is dullness, inertia, and stagnation. There's many other things I could teach about these 3 mahagunas, these 3 main qualities. But you can go back to previous sessions, and we can also talk about them more in the future. In our last 2 sessions, we talked about sattva, rajas, and tamas, and different categories of emotions and how to use these 3 categories to help effectively move emotion, stuck emotion, and energy out of the body. But we can also look at this in terms of the context that we just laid was about feeding the mind. So we want to use sattvic, we want to use sattvic food for the mind, and limit the rajasic or tamasic food that we feed the mind. So examples of each would look like: sattvic food for the mind would be looking at flowers, looking at beauty, looking at art, looking at nature. These are sattvic foods for the mind through the faculty of the senses of the eyes. Looking at things that bring us joy and that make us feel light, give us levity. You can feed the mind sattvic food through uplifting scent and aromatherapy with essential oils, with incense, with fragrance, again, from flowers, with fresh air, going down to the beach if you live near the coast and breathing in that salty air, going for a walk in the woods and breathing the mountain pine air. These are all sattvic foods for the mind. And then also rajasic food we talked last week actually about the different expressions of each one, the supportive and unsupportive expressions of each one. So even like what I'm doing right now, chatting to you, gabbing, talking, it's rajasic, because if I was totally sattvic right now, I wouldn't be talking to you. I would just be staring at the trees outside and just sitting peacefully and quietly, because that's like pure sattva, right? Just quiet meditation where there's no thought and you're just like peacefully in that absorbed state of oneness. But what I'm doing right now is feeding you through a little bit of movement of rajas, but it's like kind of sattvic rajas, if you will. So this is feeding you information that is directly uplifting the sattvic aspect of you. And so other sattvic food could look like reading spiritual texts, even though it is you want to feed the mind uplifting things. You need to, the mind's nature is to just, what we have tens of thousands of random thoughts a day. So left to its own devices, if you ever just watch the movement of the mind, it's rajasic. It's rajasic and tamasic by its own nature. So meaning it's agitated, it's excited, it's moving, it wants constant stimulus. This is why the app developers are genius and destructive, because they know how to feed into this dopamine hit. Scrolling, 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 scrolling. It's rajas at its finest, but it's a rajas that creates more excitation. It feeds itself and becomes, you have to very deliberately break that, be like, what am I doing? How long have I been on this thing? It's like, put that away, right? That's rajas. But opening a book is more sattvic, and it feeds the mind. Or listening to an audio book of a spiritual teacher or someone that's really uplifting to you, of an autobiography of a saint or someone that you admire, a role model, listening to an autobiography, listening to podcasts of people that are really uplifting to you and that have a peaceful mentality, or like a peaceful way of expression. These are sattvic foods that you can feed your mind that will help focus the mind into something productive. Because if left to its own devices, it's just going to go everywhere. So reading spiritual texts, reading spiritual books, listening to talks on a perspective that's uplifting for you, those types of things, these are all more sattvic foods. And tamasic food would be like essentially just plopping down in front of the news or in front of whatever agenda and advertisements and TV is offering you. It's rajasic and tamasic, because some of the delineations here, and it's not any judgment to, sometimes you just want to be entertained and watch something, but hopefully the entertainment that you choose is also still somehow spiritually uplifting and nourishing to you. A tamasic entertainment would look more like horror films and really violent things, like that type of stuff. There's a sensationalism of that many people are drawn to, often because they have something unresolved in them around that, so they need to watch it being played out. But it's an externalization of the thing that hasn't been like integrated. And as you fortify your system to become more sattvic and more attuned with nature and attuned with your higher spirit, then you just have less of a hunger for those types of things. And it's not necessarily a judgment in any direction. It's more just for your own understanding of like noticing your tendencies, and then at some point making a decision to say, oh, is this really the food that's going to really feed me right now? And what are the foods that I want to choose? But a great delineation for all of these is something that supports you to connect with your heart, your higher truth, and seeing life more clearly through a high, clear perspective. That's sattvic. So anything that empowers you to perceive the truth of reality more clearly is sattvic. Anything that has an agenda to try to get you to consume, buy, purchase, and enroll you in any type of way of thinking, it usually is more rajasic or tamasic, because those have agendas that they want people, that need people to follow. Does that make sense? Yeah. So you always consider the source of whatever information you're consuming. And if there are sources of information, you always have to think, what is the agenda behind this particular information that's being shared? Is it trying to get me into action, rajas? Is it trying to get me ignited and passionate and angry so that I take a stance against something? That's like a rajasic motivation for that particular communication. Or is it trying to get me to believe something so that I will blindly follow whatever the path is? And there are sattvic, rajasic, and tamasic spiritual paths as well. So a tamasic spiritual path would be like the kind of a nihilistic, what's the word? A nihilistic religions that need to try to wipe out and kill anyone that doesn't believe what they believe in. That's a rajasic. I'm sorry, that's a tamasic, kind of spiritual path. A sattvic spiritual path looks like, it can still be a unique path in and of itself with its own belief systems. It doesn't have to be totally universal, but it has room for everyone believing whatever is true for them. Yeah. So it's more centered around peace and harmony, and all paths are honored and respected. A rajasic spiritual path looks like evangelism and like, this is right, black and white, this is right, this is wrong, you need to believe what I believe. And they try to enroll you in like, you have to believe what I believe, because if not, you're doomed. So that's kind of rajasic. But a sattvic spiritual path is like, I find what's true for me and I follow that, and I respect what's true for you. And we're still all brothers and sisters on this spaceship Earth, this planet, and we still love and have harmony, and will collaborate and cooperate with each other for the greater good of all. And everyone has room to believe what they believe. Okay. I think we'll pause there for today. The last thing I just want to wrap up with is tying home some of the concepts shared around practices. So in terms of really establishing safety in your own nervous system, your own body, some of the best practices you can do: some type of prayer, connection to the divine, first thing when you wake up in the morning. Yama, even if it's just that breath we did together, the deep 3-part breathing. It could start with just belly breathing, or you can shift to the 3 parts. It's called Dirga Swasam. It's all 3 parts where you fill the pitcher of water from belly, ribs, chest, empty it, chest, ribs, belly. So just like you'd be filling up a water pitcher and pouring it out, it goes from bottom to top and then top to bottom. So pranayama of some type, consistency is key. You don't have to learn every pranayama practice right off the bat, but just consistently do one that feels really good. That Brahmari bee humming breath that we did last week is also a really wonderful one. And then the third one is using mantra. Sanskrit mantra specifically has a very unique vibration, and it rewires the mind, is a tool for your mind. That is one of the most sattvic, wonderful foods you can feed your mind, is the repetition of mantra. And there's other ancient languages, like in the Kundalini lineage, there's beautiful mantras. Whatever mantras really resonate with you. I have just studied reading and writing Sanskrit, and so I really love the language. And so I chant through my own lineage in Sanskrit. But the ones that I share with you guys are the more universal ones. And chanting that Sanskrit mantra, even just doing the one we did today, even if you didn't sing the melody, but just chanting Hari Om, that practice that we did before we went into the song is actually one that it's also a pranayama. It doubles as a pranayama practice. So Hari Om, Hari Om connects that vibration, that field of vibration. It dilates the nadis, the subtle energy channels in your body, and it helps energy just easily move through. And then in future classes, we can get more into sattvic nutrition, sattvic diet practices, and the timing of meals also can help with creating safety in the nervous system. Rituals around sleep and other practices that you can do throughout the day or before you go to bed at night that help cultivate more of that sattvic quality and create safety and peacefulness in the nervous system. So maybe these are some of the techniques and strategies and tools and teachings that we can get into next week to help you continue building on what you're wanting for here, for this time together. And we'll take some questions and any feedback that you guys would like. And Renee says sleep would be amazing. Okay, great. Yeah, we can go through sleep practices. It's very hard to attune with sattva and to retrain the mind when you're not sleeping well at night, when it's very pervasive, when there's like a lot of rajas and tamas in your psyche preventing sound sleep. So that would be a wonderful topic to go into. We can certainly do that. And hopefully all of you on this call have registered to get future notifications around these classes. And if you haven't registered yet, you can just go to my website at alicialyndiaz.com and then click the button that says trauma healing. And there's a little opt-in there that just will instantly email you, okay, here's the next classes, the next times and dates and the Zoom logins. And then I also will share recordings. I don't share all the recordings publicly, especially if there's any private information that's shared between any of the participants. So if I share it on my podcast, I will edit that part out. And but I will, with your permission, share those with just the people who were here. I haven't done any of that yet, but just so you know. But yeah, just in the registered group, will I share any recordings and also additional resources. So I know last week we talked about some resources around Sanskrit and the effect of Sanskrit on your neurophysiology, like fun things like that. Any kind of supplements or how-to videos around the practices that I'll provide here, I will share with you. So make sure you get registered, alicialyndiaz.com, click on the button that says trauma healing, and you'll get access to our ongoing classes. And Mehar asked, morning rewiring, 2 to 3 hours after waking, does that still work? I do yogic practices, Kriya and Pranayam, but I bathe and get started on the day. Yeah, wonderful. Of course, these practices need to fit into what works for you in your life. So if that morning means, after you shower and brush your teeth and like do all that, then of course, the sooner the better. But also, typically you would want to have a bowel movement before you do the breath work. And you would want to do the breath work before you have breakfast, before you eat. So you want to do the breath work on an empty stomach. So usually, most people need to eat for blood sugar balance and hormonal balance, like 90 minutes to 2 hours after waking, to have a little something, or even just like a tea or something. So usually the breath work, you would want it to start a little bit sooner than that. But if you found a rhythm that works for you, then that's a good start. And then also in future practices, I'm sorry, in future classes, we will also start talking about the ways to relate to different aspects of your mind and thoughts and things like that. These first few classes and this class, we're really talking about a lot of like foundational practices. Like, I can't emphasize enough the importance of just creating safety in your nervous system as the foundation for anything else. And then before you start going into any kind of shadow work or, reclaiming these fragmented parts, it there needs to be a priming for that. Okay, any other questions? And then after we do Q&A, I have a little meditation poem reading for you, and we'll close on one more chanting practice to send the prayers out to all beings in all existence. And if you also want to just unmute yourself, you're totally welcome to do that if you want to ask your question directly. Renee asked about the length of time for pranayama. So this is going to depend on where you're at and how much time you have in the morning. Some pranayama practice, like you can literally just, if you only have 5 or 10 minutes, you can just do 5 or 10 minutes. If you have a full 20 minutes, 45 minutes. My teacher did 4 hours of pranayama every morning for the last 40 years. He literally goes from 4 a.m. to 8 a.m. or something. Insane. I never got that much. I never attained that. But yeah, so it really depends on the individual. And I would say the most important length of time for pranayama is what you can consistently do every day. Yeah, most importantly. Okay. I don't know. Are you guys able to? I think you can. You have the power to unmute yourself. So I don't think I have to do it for you. Julia asked, is there a special pranayama you would recommend for dealing with pain like migraines? Yeah, so migraines are complex. There's usually a number of different things that we would need to approach. Migraines can be exacerbated by most pranayama. And most of the pranayama that you would want to do for a migraine would be practices that bring your energy down to your belly. So the one that we did earlier, which is like deep 3-part breathing, or just diaphragm breathing, deep belly breathing, those are the best kind of practices for pulling the energy down away from your head. And there's also like marma points that you can do on your feet and on your thighs. So if you have a migraine, there's a marma point. So marma points are the spots on your body that pierce through the mental, emotional field, and you combine with the energy field and the spiritual bodies. So it kind of goes through all aspects, and they're just these convergent nodes that help. When you press the marma point, it opens the pathways. And so directly, if you measure, just estimate halfway between your knee joint and your hip crease, halfway down, and in the very center of your thigh, there's a marma point there. And you can, on both sides, press that marma point, especially if you're feeling lightheaded or you're having some headache energy go up into your head, and you press that marma point, and that starts to help bring the energy down. It activates apana vayu, which is the downward moving energy. And when there's a headache, there's usually an excessive udana vayu, which is an upward moving energy. And so you can press that marma point. And then if my hand was the bottom of my foot, basically find the ball mound of your foot right underneath it and underneath the middle toe. I'm sorry, underneath the second toe, under the ball mound of your foot. If you point, should I just show you my foot? No, I'm not going to show you my foot. It's going to be really hard to point out that way. But it's basically, if my hand is your foot, my foot, the light is very bright. But it's basically right here, straight underneath. If this is my big toe, it's right here. So draw a line from touch your foot and draw a line from your second toe next to your big toe. And then trace it underneath the big ball mound of your toe and press that. Does that make sense? I can describe it once more. Trace your big toe, go over to your second toe, go down over the ball of your foot into the concave part of your foot and press that. As soon as you get over the mound, press that. On both feet, that's one that brings the energy down away from your head. And then if there's any, there's other things we would look at. If there's migraines, constipation, if the colon is backed up, it creates headaches. So we'd want to look at like cleansing the colon. I know you asked specifically about pranayama, but I'm giving you more of a holistic way to look at it. And then other triggers, or even just like tension in the neck and the whole back body, looking at all the myofascia of that area. And then there's ways to soften that, and there's ways to overcome. Michael asked, is that spelled marma, M-A-R-M-A? Correct. Yes. Okay, Anne Catherine asked, what do you think of neurofeedback to quiet the brain and mind? Is this like biofeedback or some kind of headset type thing that registers your breath and all that kind of thing? If that's what you mean, I'd have to say, Anne, I don't personally feel drawn to most of those feedback tools. I think many of them could be really effective and that a lot of people get a lot of benefit from them. I just can't speak to them because I personally find that any kind of tracking device or equipment takes away from my own feeling of empowerment, my own feeling of like aligning with nature, or my own, it just becomes a distraction for me personally. So I can't speak to that, but I have heard that they can be very effective. Any other questions for today? Julia said, thank you so much for these helpful suggestions, Alicia. I will try. Loads of love to all of you and greetings from Germany. Julia, I'm so happy you made it at this new time and that you could be here with us. Have a wonderful evening. All right, guys and gals, if there's no other questions for today, we'll go into our closing practice. And for those of you who haven't done this chant yet with me, I'll write it in the chat box. It's Loka Samasta Sukhino Bhavantu, and then Om Shanti. And so this closing chant, Loka Samasta Sukhino Bhavantu, Om Shanti, is a prayer that simply states, may all beings in all existence be blessed and be at peace. And so we'll chant this together. I wanted to read you this sweet little poem as well. I'll do it at the very, very end. And we'll send our prayers out and wrap up with all the love and goodness. Sukhino bhavantu loka samasta 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 sukhino bhavantu. Shanti. 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 Waves rise from water, flames arise from fire, rays emanate from the sun. So do you and I shine forth from the mysterious one. Om Shanti, love and blessings to you all. Thank you so much for being here this week. And make sure that you register for ongoing workshop classes at alicialyndiaz.com, and then click the button that says trauma healing, and it will give you an opt-in to make sure that you get the weekly days, times. I'll send those out over the upcoming days, the new days and times, as well as the Zoom and the resources and the recordings. All right. Lots of love to you. Om Shanti. Blessings. You can also always email me questions that may come up in between sessions or questions about your unique situation to hello@alicialyndiaz.com. Okay. My pleasure. Everyone's saying thank you. You learned so much, Liv. I'm so happy to hear that. I appreciate you too, Michael and Marilyn and Jody and Anne. Also, greetings from Germany. So wonderful, so beautiful. Yes, thank you all for being here. I'm so excited to see you next week, and lots and lots and lots of love and blessings to you. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. May you know the peace in your heart and continue to ride the mantra in the backdrop of your daily movements and in your heart. Hari Om, Hari Om, Hari Om. Blessings. Bye.